It is 6 p.m. and so I will call the Village of DeForest Ethics Committee meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Roger Mesa.
Here.
Ken Clark.
Here.
Abigail Lowry. Here. Kim Brimmer.
Here.
Gus Knett.
Here. Okay, next agenda item is approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of the Ethics Committee meeting of August 9th, 2021. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 9th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Next agenda item is old business. I don't believe that we have any old business. So I'll move to agenda item number 5, new business. Item number 1, consideration of arguments and submissions from Abe Dignan and Jane K. Hill Wolfgram on complaint of Abe Dignan. And
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion that I'd like to make, but before I make it, I want to explain the purpose of it, primarily for the benefit of Mr. Gagnon and for Ms. Wolfgram. The ordinance, we're here, and I think I'm revisiting something we talked about last time, but tonight we're here to decide if this goes any further, whether there's going to be an investigation of your complaint by this committee presumably, and after that investigation, the issuance of a report to the village board with perhaps recommendations for how to deal with your complaint. In 2809, it talks about this first stage that we're at right now, and if this seems like undue lawyer talk, I really apologize to everybody, but I think as I go through this, everyone will understand how important this is to the community here in the forest. In 2809-2, it says, upon the sworn complaint of any person alleging facts which, if true, would constitute improper conduct under the provisions of this chapter, the Ethics Committee shall conduct an investigation of the facts of their complaint. And that's what we did in the last meeting, essentially. And what you have to understand, everyone has to understand, is that we're looking at this complaint and saying any well-pleaded fact in Mr. Damon's complaint, we're going to accept as true, just for the purpose of this first stage. You still may have to prove it if we go to the next stage. But for tonight, we're going to accept well-pleaded facts as being true. Then the second sentence says, and this is where I want to kind of regroup a little bit, the committee shall conduct a public hearing, and that's not last month's hearing, that's another hearing to come, shall conduct a public hearing if there is probable cause to believe a violation of the chapter has occurred. And I'm embarrassed to say that I think I've been on this committee since this ordinance was written, and it never popped into my mind that we might be benefited by a definition of probable cause. And I would guess that if I asked you, Mr. Degnan, what you define as probable cause, and I asked Mr. Wiskowski or Ms. Wolfgram how they define probable cause, or the 5 members of this committee, we might get varying definitions of that term. But like so much in law, sometimes the standard that you apply is outcome determinative. If you apply a standard at one place on the spectrum, the matter comes out one way. If you apply the standard at a different place on the spectrum, it comes out a different way. So with that in mind, I did some thinking about probable cause. I did some research. This mostly comes up in the context of criminal law. And probable cause has a lot of varied meanings in criminal law, depending on what stage of the criminal procedure you're at. And I'll give you an example. A police officer that stops a driver that he thinks or she thinks is intoxicated has one standard of probable cause to insist on a breathalyzer. There's a higher standard of probable cause for the issuance of an arrest warrant for police officers to go out and bring a citizen in off the street. And then there's even a higher standard of cause, for probable cause in the context of what's called a preliminary examination, where a judge has to decide whether a prosecutor's complaint warrants going past the preliminary hearing stage and being tried. And when I thought about how these various standards of probable cause work, it was my conclusion, and I'm going to make a proposal along this line in a second by way of a motion, that we apply the higher standard of probable cause that relates to a preliminary examination in Wisconsin criminal cases. And I'm doing that for a couple reasons. One is, I think that you have asked us to consider, and we have the power under this ordinance to consider a sanction as high as the removal of the respondent here. And you actually, in your complaint, asked that we consider that result. And it seems to me like that has a big implication for the voters of DeForest. Regardless of how you feel about these TIF district issues, and I know there's been a lot of back and forth on that, and I've watched meetings on Zoom about that. I think you all want to not have the voters' will affected unduly. And for that reason, I am going to propose by way of a motion a standard for probable cause that I take from case law having to do with preliminary hearings. And I can give you citations on that. If anybody wants citations, I'll give you citations, but I'm not going to ask you to beg me for that or request that. But here's my motion, Mr. Chairman. In order for the DeForest Ethics Committee to make a finding of quote-unquote probable cause as required by the DeForest Ethics Code at subsection 28.09 sub 2, the Ethics Committee must determine from the well-pleaded allegations of a sworn ethics complaint and any reasonable inferences therefrom that to a reasonable probability a violation of the Ethics Code has been committed by the city official or employee. A reasonable probability goes beyond a mere possibility of a violation and must not rest upon speculation by either the complainant or the Ethics Committee. Now, I'm going to, if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hand
Yes.
both parties a copy of this motion.
Yes, that's fine.
Here, I'll do that for you.
Okay.
And can I have
You can have
a copy
several,
too?
yeah. And maybe I would ask, what I would ask is, when I make this motion and we hopefully engender a second or get a second for it so that we can move this into discussion, I'm going to ask both parties if they're comfortable with this standard. I think it's a standard that would serve the village of DeForest well, not only in this case, but in future cases. And I have in mind that, a higher standard will avoid having ethics complaints filed where they're not well-grounded, and I'm not suggesting that yours was not, but I think that this standard will help will help prevent the ethics code from being used for purposes it is not intended to be used for. So if you want to look that over, and I'm sorry, I don't know who's sitting to your left.
This is my attorney, Ryan Side.
Okay, hi. Have you had a chance to look it over?
This document?
The motion at the bottom, it's the motion I'm going to make here in a second. Well, you've had it now. And Mr. Chairman, I would move that for the purposes of this proceeding until the code is changed, that this committee adopt the following standard for probable cause. Moved. In order for the DeForest Ethics Committee to make a finding of quote-unquote probable cause as required by the DeForest Ethics Code at subsection 28.09 sub 2, the Ethics Committee must determine from the well-pleaded allegations of a sworn ethics complaint and any reasonable inferences therefrom that to a reasonable probability a violation of the Ethics Code has been committed by the city official or employee. A reasonable probability goes beyond a mere possibility of a violation and must not rest upon speculation by either the complainant or the Ethics Committee. So having read that, does the respondent have any?
Oh.
Or-
We need to
I'm
give
sorry,
a second.
I need a second.
Yeah, we need a second. Is there a second to the motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before doing that, one technical clarification I'd suggest is changing the reference to city official or employee to village official or employee.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
City of Madison guy here, sorry. With that, I accept that as a friendly amendment, even though you're not a member of the committee. I would modify my motion to that effect and ask for a second.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded on the motion that I believe people have in front of you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to clarify, just to make sure I understand, because I was a little confused at first with your motion. So this is to help us define probable cause so that we can, because we need to define it in order to decide whether there is probable cause and whether we would choose to conduct further investigation. Is that correct?
Right, that's the purpose of the motion.
Okay, yes, that sounds good. I thought at first you were saying there was probable cause at first, and I was a little bit confused. So, okay, that makes sense, thank you.
Any other questions or by the committee? Comments by the committee?
And as I indicated earlier, I would ask the parties whether they have any concerns or any suggestions on this motion.
We do not.
Okay, thanks.
So the one question or concern that I have is that essentially I have written my complaint, am I not Mike? I can't tell, sorry. I've written my complaint and my arguments one way, and depending on, I don't know what the committee is going to decide about the way that I've written them and about whether what I have written, I've written everything truthfully and factually, but had I known the exact standard to which it would be held, there's a possibility that things would have been written differently in order to illustrate the facts and the truthfulness, and to illustrate the standard. It feels that this standard is being done retroactively to apply to something. But had this been codified prior, I certainly would have no objection to it. What I don't know at this moment is whether having the standard codified would impact the way that I would have addressed anything in writing.
Okay. Well, I guess my immediate question is, are there other facts that you feel like you didn't put into the complaint that you, looking back, you wish you had added to this complaint?
I don't think so. I don't think so at this moment, but of course, that may be developed in the questioning or in the discussions. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether to expect extensive amount of questioning like last time, or what to expect from this?
Well, from my perspective, and this is going to be up to the chair, but my expectation is there's going to be no more questioning of either of the parties here. We're going to get down to the business of evaluating your complaint based on it, based on what you had to say to flesh it out at the last hearing of this committee, and based on your written submission. So I don't anticipate that we're going to do any questioning of anyone tonight, other than maybe question one another's sanity here. That's my expectation. Others may have a different expectation.
Committee member, I suppose we have to, if to the extent that this motion is passed and it will be retroactive to Mr. Egan's complaint, have to lodge an objection to the motion. If it's going to be retroactive, that is.
So your preference would be that we just simply go about this process without any reference to a definition for probable cause?
It's just an objection for purposes of preserving appeal rights.
Okay. Any other discussion by committee members in regards to the motion? Yes, Abigail.
I would say, I mean, this is really well written, and I think further clarifies it, and I think it's important to have a definition in place that hopefully we all agree on, because otherwise each one of us will come with our own definition of probable cause. Yours may be more based legally, so, the rest of the members are, and not that one's, any more valid than the other, but I think it's important that we come from a basis of understanding. And I'm also taking notes, just as a side note, that if we do pursue an update to the ethics code, that might be on our checklist as further defining probable cause. And even though this is a difficult situation whenever there's, heated emotions or ethics complaint, I do appreciate this opportunity to really think deeply about such an important topic. And I'll probably get more into that later, but I think this highlights, what we're kind of all learning and making sure we understand about the ethics concerns.
Any other comments from the committee? Committee is clear on the motion and understands. And I will call the motion. All those members in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll continue on then with the consideration of arguments and submissions from Abe Degnan and Jane Cahill Wolfgram on complaint of Abe Degnan. Received the information that we had requested from the last meeting, and so I would, the chair is going to open it up for discussion on the committee as to where we're at. Abigail.
Okay, I'm not sure how, I wrote up a lot of notes, so I don't know how far into it I should get. So if anyone wants to jump in with, if I say something and it sparks a comment or response, feel free to, raise your hand or whatever. But I've definitely been thinking a lot about this, obviously because I knew it was coming up for us to discuss, and ethics is really important to me as a citizen, but also as an elected official. Guides us in what we do and what we should do, and how that's, public trust is a very important part of government. So I've definitely been taking this very seriously and trying to make sure that I'm coming at this from as neutral a position as possible, and looking at all the information from you. And I really appreciate your responses that you submitted to us, and I definitely read that all over several times and highlighting different things that I want to make sure to remember and think about throughout all this. I've been thinking about it every single day, and sometimes waking up in the middle of the night because I know how important this is to everyone and the community as well. So I guess, let's see, where should I start? So first thing in terms of the exhibits or information provided by Abe, I found the video clips and the other miscellaneous exhibits helpful. I'm not sure what to do with the letters from residents because we didn't solicit that input, and I didn't find any evidentiary function from that. There was basically information that was reiterated in the exhibits that we already provided. So I also not really contemplating much from an anonymous source because pretty much anybody can say anything if they're anonymous. So just for future, if someone wants to share a concern, it's best to have your name attached to it so that you can come back to that person and ask them questions if needed. So I kind of went through, I guess I'm kind of going in order from Abe's complaint, starting with concerns about a violation of state statute 946.12, talking about excess of lawful authority. And he says, that she represented herself as, let's see, well, actually from the transcript it says where you quote from the village of DeForest. And this is partly me speaking as my experience as a trustee, and I sometimes make phone calls to different stakeholders, different community members. Basically anybody that I think has information or input that I would like that would help me in my role. And I have said, I am a village trustee, and because that's important to clarify why you're calling, especially if I'm calling somebody in the community. I might be calling, if I'm calling school district, I might be calling because as a parent, and I want them to know. But if I'm not calling as a parent, I'm sure to tell them, I'm asking questions related to the business, the village business. And it also, and I think that's common for a lot of people in elected positions that, sometimes you need information outside of meetings to help you with your decisions or help you to understand an issue better. And I think that fits with that. There was also concern that phone calls / voicemail to the executive director of Wisconsin Builders Association. I apologize, that's what I was referring to there. He also said that when she called and asked these questions that she didn't consult the village board. And again, that was asking questions. There wasn't an attempt to, conduct official village business. There wasn't negotiating or demanding action. Again, asking questions are a typical part of being on the village board for information gathering and whatnot. He also said is not authorized to act independent from the village board. As a village trustee, I've always interpreted act in terms of village business differently than common parlance. And to me, act in government terms means to make a decision, negotiate, enact a contract, etc. And I don't see her taking action with the voicemail or the phone call. Again, it was asking questions. Maybe I'll stop there because I don't want to get too long-winded if anybody else wants to. I have a lot more to say. If anyone wants to comment on that part.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. If anyone else wish to speak, Chair would.
Well, I guess I would second what Abigail said, that I think that any village trustee or any village officer, president, whomever, when they're presented with a position on something affecting village business, has the right to go conduct an investigation of that. I will say that I think that this investigation could have been conducted in a different fashion. I think that the phone call or the communication with Mr. Boyce could have been done without referencing you if the issue was just to find out what the WBA position was on TIF financing. I kind of suspect that everybody would have known that in advance, but at any rate, I can see some value to the village president being able to come back to the village in a contentious hearing on TIF financing to say that it is supported by the WBA. If you were to have testified about your view of TIF funding, I can see some value to her in terms of political back and forth, in terms of political debate, pointing out to the village board and to people at the meeting that your position was contrary to an organization that presumably you have a high regard for and believe that it's operating with solid policies. So I can see some value to the president having that conversation. But again, I think that it could have been done in a slightly different way. And that's all I have to say on the conversation with Mr. Boyce.
Anyone else?
I guess, you know, I don't really serve as a trustee, I haven't served as a trustee, and, you know, guilty of not attending really too many meetings, and, you know, I'm not a politically driven guy, you know. But, you know, I go back to the 28.03 in the, you know, the ethics code where it talks about to observe in their official acts the highest standards of morality. And that's where I keep falling back. And like Mr. Hermer pointed out, that, you know, could have just been done some of these things in a little bit more different way, that maybe wouldn't bring into question the official acts of standards being done, you know, morally sound as possible. I guess that's where I get hung up a little bit. There seems to be a little bit of stickiness to some of this stuff that, you know, may raise question, and is it enough to warrant our new code or a new motion, reasonable probability of violation? I don't know, you know, but some of it seems pretty sticky. And yes, I do agree, some of the stuff that have been done maybe a little bit differently.
Abigail.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that brought up, and definitely is sticky. I'll agree with that. And there's a lot of gray area, just in general with like people's perception of things and morality and whatnot. And I guess I meant before I started getting into like the bullet points of the complaint. So reading through, you know, our local ethics code, information from the Wisconsin League of Local Municipalities, and and the state statutes regarding ethics. I was really trying to get my mind around this because anytime, you know, people's behavior comes under scrutiny, there's a lot of gray area, you know, like what might be correct or reasonable or proper to one person or group might not be to another person or group. And then that makes it really hard for us. we're literally in a quasi-judicial role that we have to decide that when it's not always that clear. And I guess I perceive it as, we have to look at just information in front of us, the evidence. And tonight, we're assuming that everything Abe provided is truthful, exactly how he stated. And we might decide later that we look into certain things, we might not. But right now, we just basically look at the evidence and assume that it's true. And I think we have to keep in mind there's a difference between a concern that someone might have that's tied to ethics violation, and then there's a concern that's related to public perception. And those are sometimes very related and similar, but they are very different. So something can be concerning to a citizen or anyone without being an ethics violation. And strangely enough, sometimes there could be an ethics violation that's not actually concerning. At least that's how I see it. And so public perception is where there's a lot of gray area. Because like I said, people can perceive things in different ways, like what's moral, what's proper, what's reasonable, and what's not. And then when perception comes into play, that's where things can get political, that's where things can get biased. And I think we have to be careful and not look at how things can be perceived, but what actually happened. And like tonight, we're just assuming that what Abe written down is actually what happened as he stated. And deciding if we need to investigate further to see if it really is true or not. And not only, we have to look at what actually happened, but also, is it explicitly prohibited by our ethics code? Because I think if we just decide based on public perception, that rather than what actually happened and whether it was an ethics violation, then we are setting ourselves and the community up for regular complaints to be filed, and then water down the seriousness of our ethics code. And so that there might be certain things that happen that people don't like and disagree with, and I think they definitely have a right to do that, but we're deciding tonight, is it prohibited, if certain things did actually happen, is it prohibited by our ethics code? And that's how I see it, if that helps at all. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in with a comment or...
I have a comment.
Yes,
and
Kim.
It's just to modify something you said, Emil, where you said, we take as true everything in the complaint. And I don't.
Okay.
I take it as true allegations of fact. And where something is really, in my view, more of a conclusion without supporting facts, I don't credit that. And I don't think we're supposed to credit that under the ethics code. And there are, and Mr. Dagan, you pleaded a number of facts upon information and belief. And an example of this is that you have essentially pled or tried to create the inference that there was some amount of concerted action between the village president and her husband to generate the letter to the WBA and to folks at Madison Area Builders Association. And I can see that you would wonder about that, and I wonder about that too, but I don't see a well-pleaded fact to support that conclusion. That seems to me more conclusory than a fact. And because we want to make sure that we protect the rights of not only you, but protect the rights of the person that you were accusing of an ethical violation, I think we really must require you to come up with a fact to support that particular kind of allegation. Other members of the committee may differ with me on that. They may say, well, gee, they're married. Is she or is she not in the PR firm still? We heard her testimony by virtue of listening to the hearing that you had, or listening to the village board meeting that you asked us to consider, and we did. But I will tell you that at this stage, I'm not satisfied that you've pled enough facts to show that there was some kind of combination or some kind of combination between the two people. Now, having said that, I will also say that I didn't like the letter that was sent to the WBA. I thought that it was designed to create problems for you without any concomitant benefit to the village of the forest. But I don't really find that I can conclude that merely because Ms. Wolfram and Mr. Wolfram are a married couple and she was at one point, and may still be, in the consulting firm. I don't think that matters. I think partners of mine in the law firm send out letters all the time, or used to when I was still practicing, send out letters all the time, and I have no notion of what's going out from them. So on that particular fact, I'm not prepared to conclude that you have pled enough to find that there was a combination between the two of them. It's possible, I give you that, but we got to go beyond possibilities here.
Attorney Bremer.
I'm not asking for any kind of response, I'm just telling you what, as to that allegation, that was my reaction.
I have a question to ask you. I don't, if you would allow me to ask a question.
Why don't you direct it to the chair?
You have a question? Okay, go ahead.
Chairman, yeah, I have a question directly about what Attorney Bremer just said.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
I'm wondering how would the matter of fact be determined without an investigation?
It would be very difficult, I will give you that. But someone may have talked to Mr. Wolfram, someone may have talked to Mrs. Wolfram that you could have accessed and gotten information from that person to support that there was some concerted action. I don't see it in your complaint.
I would just make a couple comments in regards to this. But first I would need to, in all transparency, inform everyone that I just concluded 34 years as an administrator, both as a business manager and superintendent in a school district. So I am somewhat familiar with, or quite familiar with, how that operation, that part of government does work, and certainly was involved and made inquiries and things on my own in that role, on behalf of the board, sometimes with the board requesting, sometimes knowing that the board needed information in those areas. So I just give that background of where I came from, because that obviously will have some impact. I want to go back because we did spend a little time talking about the letter, or the phone call. I do want to comment that I had some question about that whole episode, and Mr. Boyks very clearly delineated what transpired. I had some question as to what was the intent and things like that, but Mr. Boyks cleared it up by saying that he got the phone call, talked about the testimony, asked about the association's position on tax increment financing, but then Ms. Wolfgram also made it clear that to Mr. Boyks that you had stated that you were representing yourself as a citizen. And that's what Mr. Boyks is saying, is his recollection of that telephone call. Looking and saying then that they're, and having been in situations similar to that, of making sure that everything was delineated. And Mr. Boyks, I believe, did totally delineate what was said. So there was no, reading his comments, there was no misinterpretation by anyone as to who was speaking and on whose behalf and things like that. As I read over things, As I've read over the documents and things like that, I will tell you that I continue to read the word ethics, things like that, but in my experience there, while one may question how right something is being done, I see in this situation that there are two levels. There is the day-to-day question of how well things are being done, or are they being done in the correct way, and a person with a different standard may look at this and say this could have been done in a different way, which is different. One wants to label that as ethics, which is different than the code and the standard that we are supposed to be looking at, or that we are to follow, versus chapter 28. Both deal with ethics, but as I'm reading this, I see that there are two different levels. And one can question how things were done, and quite honestly, I would tell you that I have there were things that I read that I would certainly, as an administrator, would not have done if I was in that situation. But I don't believe that they are I'm struggling to see whether or not they are to the levels of what the code states is a violation of is a violation of ethics versus via the code. That's where I am still, trying to work through at that point. But I see this as, right now, as two levels of concern, and the concern that's being expressed in the complaint. I'm also aware that there are other avenues via state statute, via potentially village ordinance, things like that, that if one was, those concerns might be better addressed in other avenues that the state of Wisconsin prescribes in statute and law. And that this may not be the appropriate route to travel via the ethics road, but there may be other avenues that would be, if those concerns are there, would be for people to travel down.
Mr. Chairman, I break down Mr. Degman's complaint into two facets, and I do this based on what he had to say last month. It seems to me that the first claim that he's making is that the village president exceeded her authority. We talked about that quite a bit already. I'm going to be prepared to make a motion that claim is not an ethical violation. The second claim is that the village president undertook a series of actions that were intended as either retaliation against Mr. Degman or intended to create problems that would be retaliation, create problems for him with the WBA, or maybe were intended to try to tamp down his positions in village meetings on the TIF issues. And I want to talk about a number of the factual allegations, well, not a number, but a few of the factual allegations. One of the allegations in support of what I see as the second claim that that Mr. Degman was trying to be silenced or intimidated or retaliated against, is this renewal of the committee assignments and the failure to renew his committee assignments. And I just don't find any basis to have that sustain any conclusion about what the conduct of the village president was intended to do with respect to these contacts with the WBA. She's absolutely entitled to make new committee assignments. I think you had said, or I'm sorry, I'm not going to address you. Mr. Degnan had said that he wasn't notified of that. The letter has come in with the submission from the village president to show that in April he was given notice that he was not being renewed and he was thanked. I've already talked about the contact with Mr. Boyks and how I find that there would have been perfectly reasonable reasons for the village president to want to get to confirm what the WBA's position was. You can like my reasoning or not, but that's my reasoning. The email. I do think this was an escalation of the situation, but I don't find that there's any allegation in the complaint that shows that that was done at the instance of the village president. If I want to just hypothesize a possibility, it would be that Mr. Wolfgren attends village board meetings perhaps, or his wife goes home and says, here's what happened at tonight's village board meeting, and Mr. Degnan is raising all these issues about the TIF financing, and he could very well take that as a reason for him to contact the WBA. Again, I've already said that I don't care for the manner in which that was done, and I don't care for some of the representations in that letter. But I'm not prepared, based on the record of this complaint, Mr. Chairman, to find that that was done as a concerted effort where the two folks formed an intent to try to harm Mr. Degnan that way. You referenced the fact that you had been cut off in meetings, and I did, and I appreciate your linking us to some of these meetings. And I listened to the June 16th meeting, which I think was problematic for you in that was a meeting, I'm sorry, I gotta quit this. It was problematic for Mr. Degnan in that he felt that he had not been given a chance to answer questions at the end of his testimony in that meeting. And the tape that I listened to, or actually the video I listened to, I forget the gentleman's name who posted it on Facebook or on YouTube. But after you testified,
No.
no, I'm sorry, after
Yes.
Mr. Degnan testified,
Yes.
the village president was asked to deal with a situation where somebody was on YouTube around the table here, and it was apparently causing an interference. And that was immediately after Mr. Degnan had testified. And then I heard on the videotape that she said, are there any, and then she was interrupted again by someone saying, this is continuing, or something to that order. And my inclination was that she was about to permit questions to come, and she had been kind of interrupted twice over this interference issue with Zoom calls, or Zoom access, and it just went by the board. But again, it's already been established that, and I think Mr. Degnan agreed with this at the last hearing, that any board member that felt that that was not the way to go could have made a point of order. And Mr. Degnan could have said, you know, I'm here to answer questions if you have any questions for me. So I didn't, all this business about the village president trying to not give him an opportunity to speak is, I think, not indicative of any desire to try to silence him. I timed your presentation at I timed Mr. Degnan's presentation at one of the village board meetings where he felt like he had not been given as much time as others to present his position, and it was something on the order of 8 minutes. So I just think that's not an indication of any kind of animus that would cause me to think that there was some kind of a concerted action. You know, I can envision, well, I already said that. The use of we I think that it's perfectly understandable that that was in reference to the builders that the village president talked about. The fact that there was some interchange that Mr. Degnan took as improper debate during that meeting, I frankly think, as I understood the situation, and probably Ms. Lowry? Ms. Lowry can correct me if I'm wrong. But as I understood that exchange, it was in reference to a complaint that had been filed at 2 o'clock that afternoon before the meeting, had not made it onto the agenda because it was not timely presented to the clerk. And all of a sudden, the meeting is going off in a different direction than the agenda calls for. And I think Mr. Degnan had an absolute right to get on the agenda and say, here's what's happened to me, and I'm going to file a complaint with the Ethics Committee, and I hope that it'll be carefully considered. And by the way, here is the complaint, and it could have either been read into the record, which would have been pretty tedious, or it simply could have just been accepted into the record. But I don't think that it was improper for the village president to cut off a discussion at that meeting over something that had not been timely filed. So many of the things that Mr. Degnan complained about, I find not to be indicative of anything, any kind of animus, but just indicative of moving meetings along in a proper fashion. There are 2 statutes that Mr. Degnan has talked about. We've talked about one of them here a little bit. That's this statute under 946.122. And, I mean, this is a Class I felony if you violate this statute. I hope we're not thinking that we're dealing with a felony here, but reasonable minds, I guess, can differ. It says in the officer's capacity, I'm going to truncate this, in the officer's capacity as such officer does an act which the officer knows is in excess of the officer's lawful authority, or which the officer knows is forbidden by law to do in the officer's official capacity. And I suppose one aspect of this is the claim that the village president couldn't have done an investigation of this issue of the WBA's position on TIF financing. But I don't find a violation of that in anything that was presented here in terms of the well-pleaded facts of the complaint. The other statute is a federal statute, 18 U.S. Code Section 241. And I'm not going to read this into the record, but it's in some of Mr. Degnan's submissions. But this is a statute that was passed in the Reconstruction era to address primarily to address treatment of African Americans where they were being kept from being able to register to vote or to actually vote at a polling place, or where crosses were being burned in their front yards or even near their front yards, or where people were using threatening language to try to move African American families out of their housing. And this statute, I mean, frankly, if you were to take this, if one were to take this factual pattern to the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Wisconsin and say, does this statute get implicated, I think you'd get a big laugh. This statute is not designed to address the conduct that has been properly factually alleged here. So that's my position on both these claims, and ultimately I'm going to make a motion to dismiss this complaint, but we're still debating it.
Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so I'll call this the way I see it. I think Mr. Degnan did the right thing to bring this to the attention of the village board. I'm not exactly sure this is the body that it should have ended up in. but I don't feel the village president handled this very well. I don't see any laws that have, I haven't come across any laws that have been broken. I agree with the vast majority of what's been communicated by the committee tonight. I wish the village president would have handled this differently. We can't go back in time. I think Mr. Dakin's message has been sent. I can tell by the feedback by the committee that it's been taken seriously. I would assume the village board is familiar with the situation also, but I'm still having a tough time finding the law that's been broken.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments that anyone on the committee wishes to make? Abigail.
Thank you for what you just said. I do agree that I think we are all taking this very seriously. And there's a lot of information to digest, and this might be all of our first time doing an ethics committee meeting, and it's such a serious topic, serious agenda in front of us. So I wanted to say about the email or letter sent out to the Wisconsin Business Association, or maybe it was to developers, sent out by Steve Wolfram. That was probably the most, I guess, as an elected official and just also as a citizen, as a person, that was the part that was most concerning to me. You know, as you said, as Abe Duggan stated in his complaint, that in the letter/email, he mentions that he is the husband of the village president. I'm trying to put that in front of me so I say it right. Yeah, as the husband of the village president in the forest. And that's very concerning to me because, I mean, he's not an elected official, he's not an employee or appointed official of the village. I feel uncomfortable with that as a trustee, that someone who's not elected to represent the community and the citizens' voices is referencing, you know, that kind of connection. And I hope that never happens again. And I will say that I empathize. There have been a lot of times where I go home at night and I talk to my husband about things said in open session. Just want to make sure that's clear. Only things in open session. He sometimes gets emotional or upset or disagrees with certain things said and done during meetings, or sometimes he'll watch or read news articles and he'll kind of joke like, oh, I should go down to that village board meeting and speak my mind, and I'm like, no, don't, please don't. I mean, it's hard to say that because he is a resident and we should be able to say his, but I know he'll kind of cause a mess. So I'm like, just tell me and I will advocate for you as any other resident that you're concerned there. But, so I do empathize with that, and I'm sure it is hard for my husband and any spouse or family member of an elected official to hear that your loved one, that it gets really hard, really heated, and maybe sometimes disrespectful, you feel disrespected, or even, I know I felt, probably in some of these meetings that Abe posted clips to, those are some of the most heated, emotional, almost traumatizing meetings that I've ever been in my over 4 years of being on the village board. And I've certainly been in heated meetings and heated topics and residents coming to meetings upset. I don't have a problem with that. I want to hear your concern. Okay, I'm getting a little off topic, but so I want to draw it back to, I am concerned that he sent that letter and he referenced association with the village through, being the husband of the village president. But that said, that's something that he did, And I don't see anything in the complaint that, that she did, that the village president did that, or that she authorized it, or approved it, or even knew about it. And, I mean, I can't find an ethics violation with something that a non-elected official or even appointed official did. It's a resident. So all I can do is just, state my disagreement with his action, and hope that something similar does not happen like that again, both for its effect on village government and village board, but also effect on, your spouse. And I think I'll stop there. That was that. So I want to point that out, because that was going through it. The other points mentioned, as I said, a lot of them were like, yeah, I've seen other people on the village board do these things. I've seen them ask questions of, call up somebody, say that they're on the village board, and, say they have questions about, I've done it. I've seen other trustees, I know what other trustees doing, trying to find information. The other things about, whether you get appointed or reappointed and notification about that. I've seen other issues where someone was I personally got unhappy that I wasn't reappointed too. So I empathize with some of the emotions that come with that, especially if you have really care about the business of that particular community, you're really invested in its success. I totally understand that. But it is the village president's purview, and from the attachment, it looks like she did send out a very nice letter thanking you for your service. And I do know that it's, change is hard, and there's going to sometimes be hard feelings when people aren't reappointed, or they're appointed to somewhere else that they don't like, and I understand those feelings, and those are valid, but those are all, it's just not part of the ethics violation looking through the code. And I'm trying to think if there are any other points that I should come back to. And then the reference to causing harm, I think Abe Duggan has stated that there isn't, harm caused, and also if we were to assume, if there was an assumption of harm, again, that comes back to a matter of public perception. There are no evidence of harm, and we need to be clear about if there was harm and if it violates the ethics code. I don't see harm, and I don't see ethics violation with that either as well. I think if there's anything else.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have a couple of other thoughts, or a couple of other conclusions. One is, we had a give and take about how Mr. Degnan could prove concerted action between the village president and her husband with respect to the letter. And I want to make clear my position that if we, for tonight's purposes, assume that there was contact where the village president said, would you send a letter to the WBA and to MABA telling them what's going on with this? There's only two ways that could possibly be an ethical violation, and it's under these two statutes that have been cited by Mr. Degnan. And even if I assume that concerted action took place, neither of those two statutes that are implicated. So just so it's clear that I'm not blowing off these statutory claims by saying that the complaint didn't do a good job of establishing concerted action. Even if there's concerted action, I don't consider either of those two statutes to be implicated. And if you don't find it there, the only other place you could find it is the section that one of the gentlemen over here, I don't remember.
2803.
Well, no, the morality business.
Yes.
And I don't want to go there. I just think that that's not a basis for us to find an ethical violation based on what happened here. But I'll reiterate again, I don't think this was handled well, Mr. Dagan, by either the village president or our husband, whether it was done in concert or not. I guess that's all I had. Yeah.
Anyone else? I would just make comment about the fact again that what I see here is more, and I will concur, there are a number of things here that do disturb me. And again, as I mentioned before, on a personal note, based on my career, my household, my family, and my children were told that you would never speak about to anyone who was critical of the superintendent or the business manager. And I know my wife suffered immensely for 34 years of having to be silent and not being able to say what she felt. And there was probably someone who was even more excited than I was when I retired because she didn't have to suffer like she did, but that was the guideline in our household, and everyone knew that. What I see here is a lot of political issue, of things that remind me a lot of what went on in my role as business manager and superintendent, both at local levels, both at state level, disagreements, people feeling strongly about positions that they had, which, rightly so, which would create animosity, which would create, issues of trust, do we have the right people in place, those types of things. But those are political issues. And there are ways within Wisconsin law and federal law that we deal with political issues. I cannot find that we've gotten to the point of any of these political issues being to the level of being a violation of the ethics code. Like I said, I think there are other avenues in Wisconsin law, and maybe perhaps I'm not familiar enough with village laws of other ways that if one was concerned or wishes to pursue, that they have other avenues that they can pursue through other jurisdictions or other areas. Like I said, I definitely have concerns about how things were handled, how things proceeded, but again, to the level of an ethics violation, of an ethics code violation, I cannot find that. Like I said, I think there are other avenues that people wish to pursue that they could pursue those concerns.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion?
Yes.
I would move that based on the sworn complaint in this matter, the information that Mr. Dagan provided us at the hearing last month, and the submissions that came to us recently from both sides, that the facts of his complaint, even if we assume that they're true, does not establish improper conduct under Chapter 28 of the DeForest Village and Forest Ethics Code. That's my motion, and that the complaint be dismissed, that there be no further action on this complaint.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded, and I will let I'll let the recording secretary repeat that motion.
I'm going to try my best.
Yes.
So please feel free to let me know if I was writing as fast as I could. Based on sworn complaint and matter and information submitted by A. Degnan and recent submissions, even if facts are true, they do not violate the Chapter 28 of the Village Code.
And then there was the dismissal, right?
Oh,
Yes,
I'm sorry.
and that the complaint be dismissed without any further action by this committee.
It has been moved and seconded on that motion. Any discussion that any board member wishes to have? If not,
Chairman, would you please indulge me for 60 seconds or so?
okay,
I do want to point out that what I said earlier, that had I known about the level of standard of investigation that was going to apply, that may have changed my willingness to accept the August 30th deadline and the date for today's hearing in order to allow me to accommodate my own further investigation and lay out the facts that were necessary. Also, I did want to mention that if the highest standard for evidence is to be used, then shouldn't also the highest standard and expectation of ethics be applied to the people concerned? And third thing is that I heard words of speculation coming from the ethics committee themselves, words of speculation and assumption, even following the point where it was said that that I was making speculations and assumptions, that I stated things upon information and belief. And finally, just as a citizen of this community, exercising my First Amendment rights, it is just vital that the citizens of this community do not feel intimidated, that they feel okay coming forward to speak at committee meetings, village board meetings, and if necessary, to defend themselves by even issuing a complaint to this here ethics committee. Thank you for
okay,
listening.
thank you. Any further discussion? As a member of the committee, the chair is requesting a roll call vote on the motion.
Roger Neeson?
Here?
Aye or nay?
Aye.
Ken Clark?
Aye.
Abigail Lowry?
Aye.
Kim Grimmer?
Aye.
And Sheriff Knapp.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, the motion has carried. We then move on to item number 6, any other business that lawfully comes before the committee. Yeah, Abigail.
I would just say that, if anyone, so as a member of the ethics committee and also as a member of the village board, if anyone, any residents would like to reach out to me, phone call, email, whatnot, to, either further talk about this and my reasoning, or ethics in general, or village business in general, feel free to reach out, please.
Okay. Item 7, set date and time for next meeting if needed. I only raise that issue because there has been conversation during this process as to whether or not the whole Chapter 28 Ethics Code should be reviewed, and I would assume that that would be the committee who would initially review that. So I don't know what the will of the committee is as to whether we wish to pursue that or wish to pursue that, and when we might, if we decide that we want to pursue that, when we might want to begin work on that. Abigail.
I guess it kind of depends on the process, like, that we would want to pursue, like, would we want, to work, you know, to have a draft and then the next meeting discuss that draft, or have meetings and draft it as we discuss and go? I don't know if anyone has a preference or opinion on
Let me ask this, does this go beyond this probable cause definition? Are we doing a wholesale review of the ethics code?
My impression, the chair's impression was, as we had the last meeting and some discussion, was the fact that there was, that it might be time to just review the entire policy. Obviously, we found one thing that we have a concern about, but there's certainly, as I've glanced through this, I can't hide, you know, in the back of my mind, there have been other things that I thought, okay, I certainly would need more clarification on and things like that. My thought would be is that we would look at the entire policy. Now, I'm only gonna speak from my perspective of when I had to do this as a school administrator. Is our process basically there was we would take the policy and we'd begin and review it. And if there were areas that people had concern or whatever, we would go out and try and find drafts of ways that things could be done or whatever and review them. But I would envision the first meeting, if we're going to review this, the first meeting would be just to go through this policy and highlight, okay, what are the concerns that we have? What are the issues that we have that we want to at least take a look at and go forward from there, and then decide how we want to proceed. But that would be, again, you gotta remember, I'm speaking from my perspective of how I did things in a school district, which may not be, you know, equivalent to a municipal government. Abigail?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me, and I'm wondering, I think that's a good place to start, and coming fresh from today, we might have some really good ideas of, you know, where we can tweak things or update things. And I was wondering if that same first meeting, or if it would be a second meeting with, coming with suggestions for things that are not currently in the code that we might want to add, because like maybe other municipalities have it and we might want to consider it.
I guess my feeling would be is we would create an agenda item or something to take a look at other things that we need, not only review this, but obviously part of the review would be, okay, what are there things that we're missing that we need to bring in? Mm-hmm. Are there new things that we have to, that are not in here?
Yeah, that would be great. I have some ideas on that. And,
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm guessing Al would help us a lot.
Yep, go ahead.
I
Ken.
think parallel to this discussion, I don't know where this fits in, but either village staff or the attorney for the village should take a look at it first and compare it to other similar size villages or village language to what we have, and also apply the rule of law. Maybe needs to be updated in that language. I would, I'm not exactly sure where in the process that fits in, but if we're making decisions or making comments on language that are, I'm not an attorney, but don't parallel with the rule of the law, we're just, in my opinion, we're wasting our time a little bit. Either have that reviewed by an attorney first, and then reviewed by this committee. To me, that might make a little bit more sense, but that's just my opinion.
Well, no, I appreciate those comments. Okay, so I think if I'm hearing right, then the first meeting would be such that we would review the policy, and I would assume that, I better not assume. I guess I would ask, would we be able to have the, I don't know why I need to ask, the village attorney present at the meeting to guide us through that and have them, I think it would be valuable to have. Review our current policy, take a look at what areas we feel need to be added. And the third would be asking that we get some sample policy, other policies from other municipalities, so that we could then use those as we move forward to try to keep the process moving. Those would be the agenda items that or the items I would see that we would try to cover at that meeting. If there's concurrence with that. Okay, Abigail?
Just wondering, are you or the ethics committee okay with, if, since I'm so, I guess, wrapped up on this issue, are you all okay if I do my own research on, different municipalities? I've kind of already started doing this, but my own research on municipalities and like noticing like, oh, they have this, maybe this is something we want to, like, are you okay with that in addition to whatever Al brings forward?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, Al can certainly bring some things forward do you work with your firm work with other municipalities, so you would have things available? I also thought, coming from a different, having been in Partyville or whatever, and working with governments up there, municipal governments up there, that I might contact them and get some ideas too. And I think any committee member who would have any contact with a municipality would be great to bring information. I don't think that needs to be just funneled from one direction. The more we have, we might regret having so much, but the more we have, we got at least some background to take a look at and see what other people are doing and get some ideas maybe. Yes, Ken?
Are there specific parts of the language that committee members don't agree with? That you start with first, or are we looking to rewrite the whole thing?
Well, again, and I'm only speaking as one member of the committee. We have to sit in the middle chair, but that doesn't mean anything. What I'm looking at is basically, I think, at least going through this first and saying, are there parts that we're okay with? Are there parts, and then discover, are there parts that we struggle with? And it may be such that, I look and say, if one person struggles with something, it's something that we need to take a look at, because we want to make sure that we have a good comprehensive document when we're done. And again, there might be parts that we look and say, they're just fine. They're staying in no matter what, and we're going forward with that. But I think part of that would be at that meeting to sort of identify those.
Yeah, and that's why I bring in the guidance of an attorney.
Yep.
While we do that, because we might not like part of the language, but it definitely needs to stay in there.
Yep. And that's why I asked, and that's why we will make sure. I got some nods from people and especially from our attorney, that he'll be here, so.
Well, your attorney will attend the meeting, but I'm not going to be wanting to be in a position of giving legal advice to the committee.
Yeah.
That's Mr. Winter's job.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we will have one here, but yeah. But this is ultimately the attorney for the village is the one who's going to give the final blessing from a legal standpoint. At least as, again, per my experience. And you're correct, that any policy has to run past, has to go through an attorney before.
Yeah, I don't want to I'm just looking, Mr. Chairman, to maximize our time if we're
Yep.
going to take this on.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, would it be okay for the committee to meet via Zoom? Just because we do have some members who need to travel.
I was the one that asked about that, and if we're going to do what we're talking about doing in this first meeting, where we're going to be exchanging documents and that sort of thing, I will come from Madison, and maybe I'll even bring the ethics code from Madison. I'll have an emails with this and all. But I'm happy to come for the meeting, because I think that'll be more effective.
That's where I draw the line.
Yeah, I think there's some agreement there. Okay, let us look at dates. And I will let people throw out.
I think Wednesdays are pretty good for me, either the 22nd of September or the 6th of October. That Wednesdays also work really good.
I'm gonna say, if it's Wednesdays, I need to allot probably 3 weeks, only for the fact that, while I'm retired from my day job, I still have a night job on Wednesday nights where I help people save big money at Menards, and I need to ask off, which is not a problem, but I just, schedule's out 3 weeks, so the earliest would be the 6th that I could meet.
6 works for me.
Works for me.
I can,
If possible, Chairman, could I check room availability?
Yes.
I could always send out some other Wednesdays that would work
Okay.
well.
Ken,
Starting at October 6th.
Ken, what were you gonna say?
I can probably make the 6th work in person. Before and after that, my travel schedule is pretty full,
On Wednesdays,
during the week.
during the whole week, okay.
So I'm gonna communicate to the committee that Zoom's probably gonna work better for me.
Well, and we may end up having, or we may have a hybrid meeting where those of us who can come, and then if we can Zoom here, we'll do, or however, we'll work that out. But I've heard 2 people who Zoom would, once we get past that first meeting, okay. So we will target the 6th at least, and then we will, if we don't have a room available the 6th, you'll have to let us know and we'll have to regroup.
This room is not available, but I can look for other rooms and see what happens.
Okay.
But that's fine, I'll just start there.
Okay, so we'll sort of plan at this, on the 6th,
6 o'clock, okay?
6 o'clock? Okay. Okay, we have done that. So now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. This Village of DeForest Ethics Committee is now adjourned.